Good morning, everyone. My name is Dwight Cranford, and I'm part of the leadership team here at NetApp. Thank you for joining us today for Knowledge and Know-How with NetApp support. We're really excited that you're here, and we've got some great content we're going to share with you. So let's take a look at the agenda. One of our technical experts is going to give you an overview of two tools that we use in support when troubleshooting issues: Converged Systems Advisor and ActiveIQ. He's also going to walk you through a troubleshooting scenario so that you can get a look at some of the methodologies that we use. Also, I'm going to share some upcoming events that we have here at NetApp coming in the near future. We will be taking questions during this webinar, so if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and make sure you address it to all panelists. Due to some privacy constraints, we won't be sharing the chat after the webinar, but we will be sending out all the slides, and we'll send out a recording. So why is NetApp support doing these webinars? We think it's important to connect with you even when we're not trying to troubleshoot and resolve an issue. We want to share things that we use in support, like the tools and also the steps that we take when we're trying to resolve issues, so that you'll know exactly what to expect when you're working with our support teams. One of our priorities is building effective partnerships with you. We want you to feel like when you contact our support team, you're actually contacting an extension of your own team. And we want you to know that we're going to prioritize your case and get them resolved as quickly as possible. So we're taking a proactive approach by doing webinars such as these to give you an idea of, what we're going to do to help you and how we can improve your customer support experience. We're going to share products and tools with you, and we're going to show you how these tools work and how we use them, because you also have access to them. They can help you better manage your environment, and they can help you prepare before you open that support case. By sharing this knowledge and working together, we want you to be confident when you're contacting our support center, and we want you to know that you're going to get the best customer support experience possible every time. So with that, I'm going to introduce our technical expert. Chance Bingen is a senior escalation engineer who's been at NetApp for 13 years. He focuses on our virtualization, FlexPod, and HCI product portfolios. Now I'm going to hand it over to Chance, and he's going to start with showing you our Converged Systems Advisor tool. Chance?
Thanks, Dwight. Good morning, good afternoon. As Dwight said, in today's Knowledge and Know-How with NetApp support, we have a few goals we want to accomplish today. So let's start off by talking about Converged Systems Advisor, or CSA for short. Let me caveat this and the next section by saying that these tools that I'm talking about today can do so much more than I'm going to cover here. We really just are going to scratch the surface and focus on specifically using these tools to bring value in a general support or troubleshooting context. CSA is a tool that you can use to validate, monitor, and automate your FlexPod environments, pretty much all of them at scale. By the way, CSA is included with your solution support contracts, so if you have that entitlement, you should already have access to CSA. So when I say validate, what do I mean? As anybody who's ever looked at the FlexPod solution library knows, there are literally scores of CVDs and NVAs. That's Cisco validated designs and NetApp verified architectures. CSA has awareness of nearly all of them, meaning it can look at your port configurations, VLANs, zoning, cabling, disk shelves, and so on. And it knows what's correct per the design docs and what might be out of alignment with them. Some of you may be thinking, hey, I can just use that to validate my deployment and then be done with it. That's true, you can do that, but it's not just an initial setup tool. It's used for continuous monitoring, and it's able to tell you what changed from one day to the next, which is incredibly powerful when we need to go back and look at what might have changed and what might cause an issue. Just as important as monitoring is the fact that it can automatically remediate certain problems if you choose to do so, by using built-in Ansible playbooks. Now this is a new feature, I should say, that we are just starting to scratch the surface on, but it really brings a new capability to remediate things in a fast, simple, and accessible way that didn't exist before. There are two primary ways to use CSA as an administrator. One is to have it send you scheduled email reports, and we'll look at how to configure those later on in the webinar. But you'll primarily use the cloud-based web portal for most of your tasks, like checking your FlexPod for validation, rule failures, firmware compatibility, and so on. By the way, CSA uses the term CI in the interface, which stands for Converged Infrastructure. It uses that term to refer to your FlexPods. So when we look at the portal later on in the webinar, whenever you hear me say CI, just think FlexPod. The way CSA works is from a SaaS model based in the NetApp cloud, hosted back here at NetApp. You deploy a small agent VM that uses containerized applications inside of it to talk to your VMware vCenter servers, your ONTAP systems, your Cisco networking devices, and Cisco UCS Manager. It pulls in all this information and builds a picture of the environment, validating against rules based on the CVDs and NVAs, checking interoperability, and looking at health risks built by subject matter experts, assisted by analytics and our massive data lake. Since we're talking about support today, how do we use it, meaning support engineers like myself? Primarily, we use it for automating 3 key tasks that would otherwise take a very significant amount of time to accomplish. First, we use it for configuration validation, which I'll show you momentarily. Second, we use it for validation of software and firmware versions across the solution stack. And lastly, we use it for identification of known risks based on signature detection. Now, I'm going to do a quick demo of CSA so you can see how we use it. Before we do that, do we have any questions?
We do have one question from Raghu, and that question is, how do I use Ansible playbooks to automatically fix something?
That's a great question. We're not going to cover that in the demo, but it's real easy to do. When we do the demo, you'll see I expand some of the rule verifications. And if you have a violation, when you expand that rule and look at it, some of them will have a gear icon. What you'll do is you'll just click on that gear icon, and a blade will slide in and ask you a couple questions. You answer the questions, you'll click a button, and it'll go fix whatever was broken. It'll fix it for you.
Okay. Looks like there's no more questions, so let's move on to the demo.
All right, we'll go ahead and start the demo.
And just a reminder, please send all questions via chat and make sure you send them to all panelists.
Now let's take a look at the portal at csa.netapp.com using one of our demo systems. Again, I do want to remind the audience that CSA can do a lot more than I'm going to cover here. This is just stuff we might look at in support and you might use to resolve issues on your own. First, I want to let you know that I can't see your systems. So for me to be able to see your systems and assist you, you have to share it to me. So you'll go up and click on that gear icon. Then we'll select our CI from the list of CIs. Click the share icon. Enter in the contact details for your support engineer. You'll give them read access and hit send. Now, when you're done working with that engineer, you will want to go back in and remove their access. Now, back on the dashboard, let's look at the dashboard and we'll go clockwise from the top left. Here you can see the deployment is using supported versions of firmware all the way across the stack. That's good news. Next, we'll continue clockwise and look at these 4 donut charts. Before we do that, let's go ahead and look at the IMT report. So that'll give you some more details of your interoperability. When you go into the IMT report, you'll have 2 options. You can use a PDF output, or you can view it right in your browser. So if you do the PDF option, it will email it to you. If you view it in your browser, you'll get this pop-up window. It just comes up after a few seconds. Now, when you get this pop-up window, or if you even open the PDF file, you'll definitely want to scroll all the way down to the bottom. There are critical notes and alerts down there that can otherwise be missed, and they oftentimes won't show up anywhere else but that location. So now let's go ahead and look at the donut charts. There's a donut for each component of your CI. And here we'll see that your storage has 14 rule failures. So we'll go ahead and drill into the storage. Normally it's filtered by default for failures, but we can look at warnings too. Sometimes those are interesting. Also over to the right, you'll see that there's a legend that breaks it down into similar categories. So let's expand this FAS and Nexus switch rule and see what it says. Looks like this ONTAP system is missing a connection to some of its switches. We can illustrate this failure by going up and looking at the visualizations that are available under Diagrams and System Diagrams. So we can hover our mouse over the different storage systems, and we can see that, yes, that particular system does seem to be missing some connections. And that could be an issue. Think about that later on when we talk about troubleshooting methodologies. In this example, maybe that's fine. Maybe you added this controller and it isn't part of the FlexPod yet. So we can go back and either permanently or temporarily suppress those rules so they don't distract us anymore. Just check the checkbox for the rule you want to suppress. Click the suppress icon, and then we'll set a time frame that we want to suppress the rule. So we'll pick 1 day here, and we can hit submit, and it'll pull that failure out of the list. It'll also take it off the donut chart, so those rules will get decremented. Remember, CSA knows about scores of CVDs and NVAs, so it's likely you'll find some rules that don't apply to your setup. And that's fine. Just be mindful if you do suppress any of these rules. Don't hide any that are important and relevant to your setup. Going back to the dashboard, we'll continue clockwise. If we scroll down, we can see the complete list of rule failures that aren't filtered by those donut charts. Next, we have capacity. And capacity is still in its infancy. Chassis, for example, currently represents chassis slots. Network port utilization actually represents ports that are in use, but disk space utilization is actually very useful, as oftentimes space utilization is an issue. If we move up, continuing clockwise, we've got our devices monitored, which is basically the inventory for our CI. And then we have agent status. Here's where we can change our collection interval. It can be any of these options, but customers will usually leave that at the default, and that's usually what you want to do. Now, one other thing I want to look at, if we go to network and look at this switch, we can scroll down and go to interfaces, and we can see the negotiated status of every link on that switch. Now let's say that we want to see if anything changed in the network. We can go back up, click View Config Difference, select a collection to compare against, and then we can see what changed. So now that it's loaded up, we can scroll back down and look at the configurations. And here we can see, yes, something did change. It looks like the VLANs changed on port channel 30. And maybe that caused an issue that we're trying to troubleshoot. That wraps up our little CSA demo for today. Do we have any questions from the audience?
It does look like we have a question, and the question is from Vin, and he wants to know, is CSA only for FlexPod?
Yes, currently CSA is designed for FlexPod solutions. It uses all of the design docs that I mentioned earlier, and it validates against those rules.
Okay. And then one more question from Brian is, can I add a new device to existing CIs even though I've run collection without that device?
Yes, you can. So as I mentioned earlier, that CSA actually has an agent that runs on-prem using containerized applications. The agent has its own little web portal. You can simply connect into that, add your new devices, go back into the web portal for the cloud-based service, edit your CI there, and run a new collection, and it'll validate all the rules against the devices you've added.
Okay, and we've got one more question. Is CSA at all useful if we just have ONTAP systems without being in the FlexPod?
So I would say there could be some value there. That's not necessarily what it's designed for. It could check and look at the health of the systems, but you might be more interested in the next tool we're going to talk about for systems like that, which is ActiveIQ. There's a lot in there that is very similar to CSA, but isn't designed and isn't really optimized for FlexPod specific use cases. So I hope that makes sense, and you'll see that here in a moment.
Okay. I don't see any more questions here, so Chance, why don't you go ahead and show us ActiveIQ?
Okay, all right, so ActiveIQ, or AIQ for short, we're going to go ahead and take a look at that and see how that can also help resolve issues that you might otherwise find difficult to track down. So those of you who've been using ONTAP for a long time may remember ActiveIQ as simply auto support. But today it's grown. It's much more than that, leveraging AI and machine learning for predictive analytics and proactive support recommendations. ActiveIQ actually leverages 4 petabytes out of ASUP's massive data lake, which is itself many, many petabytes of data, plus curated content driven by a host of specialists ranging from our data scientists, developers, architects, and especially support engineers like myself. I actually have the authority to go in and submit rules and things that can be alerted to in ActiveIQ. So all NetApp platforms now use ActiveIQ, as do many of our standalone software products. You may think of ActiveIQ as simply the web page that you look at, but it's really much more than that as well. It's actually a platform that can be leveraged by lots of different systems. It's even got a RESTful API that you can use to write your own applications for if you'd like to do that. So let's focus on a few specific use cases that we have in support for ActiveIQ. First of all, I'm sure most of you have seen automatic case creation, automatic hardware shipments like failed disks, power supplies, even automatic case handling for support cases that occur without even needing human interaction. But did you also know that your ONTAP system, if configured to do so, will check in with ActiveIQ at regular intervals to see if support needs any extra data from it? If it finds a pending request for something like, say, a performance archive, it will go ahead and collect that data and upload it for you. This is a massive time saver and really helps expedite data analysis. Another feature is that it integrates with OneCollect to offer some automated validation using the interoperability matrix tool, or IMT for short. It's not commonly known, but the IMT also has its own API that can be used, and ActiveIQ leverages the IMT to run all of your checks for you. As anybody who's ever used the IMT knows, it can be very time-consuming to validate an entire environment. ActiveIQ takes hours of work and turns it into minutes. This is important because many issues are actually caused by unqualified drivers, firmware, OS patches, and so on when they misbehave. Risk signature analysis leverages machine learning and community wisdom to alert you to known issues you are exposed to and what their impact might be, and even how to fix them. And of course, a lot more than that. So we're going to go ahead and look at a demo of ActiveIQ. Before we do that, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, there's one question from Mary, and she'd like to know, will ActiveIQ display any sensitive security data about my company?
So no, not really. ActiveIQ is based on auto support data, so it's going to have mostly configuration information and logs that are uploaded by auto support. The only thing that you might be concerned about there, and you'll see some of the things in the demo, such as initiator groups, for example, you'll see that in the demo. It'll have your initiator node names in there. In the event logs, may sometimes have things like IP address when we receive an error from an IP address. So if those kinds of things don't necessarily bother you, then no, there's nothing else that's really secure related that we would have access to.
Okay. It looks like there's currently no more questions, so why don't you show us the demo of ActiveIQ? And just a reminder, if you do have questions, put them in the chat and address them to all the panelists.
Okay, so to start with ActiveIQ, I'm going to go ahead and bring up one of our NetApp business units so we can see what's going on. You'll note that systems is specific nodes of any type, E-Series, ONTAP, Element, Storage Grid, etc. It lists all registered systems, including ones that are decommed, but where the owner didn't let us know to remove the system. Now, if I scroll down in this display and pick a cluster, as this loads, you'll notice that the left-hand menu bar changes. It's context driven. So here we'll go up and look at health reports, which is the most used section by a pretty large margin, actually. From here, you can filter by alert severity, and you can also click on a link in corrective action to see how to fix it. And you can click on the signature for more details. One other thing I'll mention while we're on this screen is security vulnerabilities. NetApp takes security very seriously, and you can see any security-related concerns for this specific system on this tab. Let's go back to the site dashboard. And in the inventory widget, we will click on ONTAP systems. This will take us to the inventory page and filter for all the ONTAP systems in this site. We'll scroll back down and let's go ahead and click on Durham Backup Cluster 4. So now let's say you have a risk or even an impact and you want to upgrade for mitigation. You can click on the upgrade recommendation at the top, or on the left, you can click on Upgrade Advisor. For this system, you'll notice that there's a checkbox at the bottom to check peer clusters. That's for SnapMirror. The idea there is to check and make sure that upgrading won't impact any of your SnapMirror relationships. If it does, it will show you. So you want to go ahead and specify your target version and make sure that checkbox is checked. Target version will default to the latest supported release for your platform. So if you're on an older platform that doesn't support 9.6P1, like in this example, it'll show you that release instead. Here we can see the direction of all the snap mirrors in and out, but it does look like if we proceed with this upgrade, we'll end up with some issues. For our purpose today, we'll go ahead and proceed, but in real life, you would definitely want to take a look at upgrade plans for those other systems too. On the Generate Plan page, here we'll keep non-disruptive checked, and we will check Include HA Partner. And we want to keep Revert checked as well in case we have to back out the upgrade. By the way, Upgrade Advisor won't do multi-hop upgrades like going from something like 8.3 to 9.6. You'll have to do your first hop, then generate a new plan for the next hop, and so on. You can check the status of any upgrade plan requests on this tab. Here we can see that latest one is requested. Now we'll go back to a production cluster, and we're going to look at performance. We use this pretty commonly in support to gauge the level of workload and latency being seen on the controller at a historical point in time. Usually support cases get opened after something has happened, and commonly it's related to system load. So we can go here and look and validate if the cluster was doing what it was supposed to, given the workload at the time. We'll change the date to the 25th so we have the data from the previous day, and we'll change to cluster latency so we can see if any nodes were responding slowly. And here we can see that, yes, this cluster had some nodes running slow around this time. Keep this in mind again for later when we talk about troubleshooting. One note about this view, the more you select and the larger the cluster, the slower this interface will be. So generally, I recommend try and keep it to just what you want to see at any given time. Now, one thing I want to mention about the performance view, it's not as granular as, say, a perfstat or perf archive would be, but it does go a long way towards helping identify an issue if it was related to load or latency. Next, we'll briefly discuss ActiveIQ Interop Advisor. Once you click into it, it will allow you to search for a OneCollect job that was already uploaded or upload a new one. Now for these OneCollect jobs to give you the results you want, you really need to include all of the components from end to end. For example, an ESXi host, a Brocade switch, or an ONTAP system. If you don't have all the components, especially the ONTAP system, actually, you won't be able to see the picture you won't be able to put the picture together that you want to see. At a minimum, you really need the host and the storage in the same collection. What this will do is allow you to see the interoperability profile of your environment and make assessments about what drivers, firmware, hardware, patch levels you have and where you need to be. Next, we'll take a quick look at advisories. While we don't use them extensively in support, they can give you some ideas about how you can better optimize your systems and avoid support incidents, or at least understand more about your environment. One thing to note is that all of the widgets, or at least almost all of the widgets in ActiveIQ have this download icon you can click on, and that will allow you to download the data from that widget into a spreadsheet so you can work with it offline. So again, we'll go ahead and start top left and go clockwise. First is Flash Advisor. What that does is it looks at workloads in your environment on spinning disk to see if they need to go to flash. Next, we have Protection Advisor. What that does is it basically looks at all the volumes on that system to see if they're protected by SnapMirror or not. Next, we have Fabric Pool. What this does is it looks at cold and inactive data in your environment to tell you if any of it could be tiered out to cloud-based storage, whether it's public cloud or private cloud, such as a NetApp storage grid or an Amazon S3 or something like that. Below that, we have Performance Guarantee Best Practice Gaps. What this does is it looks at the performance best practices and looks for rule violations. You can mouse over the different sections in the donut chart to see what the rule is and what the violations are. There's one more thing I want to show you today, and it's actually the one that we most use in support, and that is the ASUB data view. These are very similar to command line outputs in ONTAP and other storage operating systems. You could do something here like look at your iGroups. I'll go ahead and show you that now. And from there, we'll look at initiators, and that's going to let us know which host can access which LUNs. For that, we'll need to go to a weekly data collection or one that was requested by a support engineer. And there's iGroups. Next, we're going to go ahead and change our collection to a management log. And that's going to change the available sections. We'll go down and take a quick look at the EMS log file. I mentioned that earlier. And so here we can see if there are any errors being seen by the storage system at that time. And that's it for our demo today. Do we have any questions from the audience?
You have one question from Bill. And the question is, does a performance section provide different data than Unified Manager / performance tool?
Generally, no. You're going to see the same stuff in Unified Manager. They're based on the same counter manager objects. We just kind of catalog and display them differently in ActiveIQ. But you can, Active IQ is accessible from anywhere. So if you're at home, for example, you can log in and take a look at that there. But it is all based on the same counter manager objects, if that answers your question.
Okay. And Jason also wants to know how he can get access to Active IQ.
So Active IQ is tied in with your NetApp SSO and your NetApp support site account. So all you have to do is create a support site account and make sure that gets associated with your serial numbers. And then once you do that, you'll be able to log into Active IQ, and any serial numbers that you own or have access to will be visible there.
Looks like there's no further questions this time.
Okay. So now that we've covered some of the tools in our toolbox, let's talk about the troubleshooting process and how we might use tools like those to resolve an issue. For our example today, we have a virtual server admin that is reporting his virtual machines are seeing a performance decline and some associated storage errors. Now, we aren't going to have time today to dive into deep dive into things like ESX Top and tools like that, but we'll have we do have some time to give you some ideas for how to understand the issue and where to look for clues, specifically using some of the tools we talked about earlier. So the first thing we do is frame the issue. So what does that mean to frame the issue? Well, fundamentally, it's about understanding the issue in context. In this example, we might ask the admin, is the issue constant, or does it only occur at certain times? Is it only one virtual machine or many? Are all impacted virtual machines isolated to only one data store or only one host? What are the storage-related errors that you're seeing? Are the errors across all VMDKs or only some? Once you understand all these things, it leads to what is called fault isolation, or in other words, determining where exactly the source of the issue lies. Once you know that, you can start to understand what the best way to remediate the problem is. I mentioned understanding the issue in context. Context also includes the operating environment. In today's example, we might want to know what the guest OS is. What's the hypervisor version? What is the vCenter version, or do we even care? vCenter doesn't have anything to do with the data path, so maybe we don't care about that right now. At this point, you should have enough information to start troubleshooting. You may already know where the fault is, but if you don't, it's always recommended to pick a methodology and stick with it, meaning don't jump around randomly. Pick a spot to begin your investigation and work your way out from there. There are 3 methodologies we typically talk about. All 3 of them rely on your understanding of some way to model the solution you've implemented, be it the OSI model, the TCP model, even something as simple as just understanding the layout of the data path in your deployment. So first we'll talk about the top-down model. With top-down, you start at the application layer and work your way down the stack until you find the fault. For example, looking at this diagram of the Windows storage stack model taken from Technical Report 3441, if an application can't access, say, the D drive, for example, move down the stack. Is the D drive actually there? If it is, can you access it and read or write to it? If so, that could indicate a problem with I/O being stuck in the application. If the D drive is missing, move down the stack to disk management. Is the disk there, but the volume is offline? Can you make it online? And so on until you find the problem. The bottom-up approach. With this, you start at the storage, verify everything is healthy and configured correctly there, and then work up the stack from that point. So using the example of an I/O error reported by the application, we can actually start at the storage side. The first thing to look at is to check if the LUN exists in Active IQ, like in this screenshot. Is it online? If it isn't, fix it. If it is, move up to the next layer. Is it mapped to the right initiator? Remember when we looked at iGroups in Active IQ? Does the port set allow the right targets? Do reporting nodes allow the right nodes? And so on until you start working out from storage nodes to switches and finally to hosts. The third, which may be the best or worst option depending on the nature of the issue and your particular skill set, is to start in the middle and split the problem in half. This can be very tricky, but if done right, can eliminate half the problem right off the bat. So if we look at this example, taken from our CSA that we looked at earlier, you can really use this tool to help understand your environment and how starting in the middle might eliminate half the problem. All that being said, generally I have found that the best approach is to do either top-down or bottom-up, depending on which end of the solution you have the most control over or are the most familiar with. From a NetApp perspective, we can actually do most of the bottom-up work using ActiveIQ or CSA without ever having to touch the storage or use any of your valuable time. But to do that, we do need to know all of that framing information I mentioned previously. If we know exactly which host, initiator, target, LUN, timestamp of the error, etc., that we're looking for, then we can knock out a lot of that work pretty quickly, even ahead of time before we engage with you, the customer. So in summary, we covered 3 key topics today. That was CSA, AIQ, or ActiveIQ, and troubleshooting methodologies. I hope you learned a lot about how we tackle issues in the field. Now I'll turn it back over to Dwight.
Thanks, Chance. Again, if you have questions, you can still put them in the chat, and we're still monitoring that, and we'll try to get them answered before the end of the session. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you are going to get a survey. So please take a few minutes. There's 8 questions and then a comment box, and we want to know exactly what you want to hear about in future webinars like this one. So please take a few minutes to fill out the survey. Also, if you have follow-up questions or you want to send your comments via email, or also if you want to schedule time to meet with us in person, we'll be at VMworld in a couple of weeks. And we'll also be doing more demos at our support booth at NetApp Insight. So you can send us an email at ng-supportwebinars@netapp.com. Some events we have coming up soon is NetApp Insight 2019. That's October 28th through the 30th in Las Vegas. And then episode 2 of Knowledge and Know-How with NetApp Support is going to be November 13th, 2019. Again, if there's anything that you're interested in hearing about, please send us that information. We're currently building the content for that webinar. We're also working on some regional support conferences that we're really excited about, and there'll be more to come on those in early 2020. In the slides, we're going to be including these references to the content that we discussed today. So using the slides, you'll be able to click directly on these links, and it'll take you to that content. We'll also send that email address that I talked about on the previous slide, so you'll have that information as well. Let me check one more time to see if there's any questions in the queue. And it looks like there's currently not any. So again, if you have follow-up questions and you think of them after the webinar, shoot us an email and we'll make sure that we get back to you. I want to thank you for your time and thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you November 13th for episode 2 of Knowledge and Know-How with NetApp Support. Thank you.